Have you ever wondered why a man can move on from 100 faces, but never from one particular woman? It is not always beauty that leaves him restless in the night, nor the perfection of form or grace. It is something quieter, more dangerous. The way she moved through his life without clutching at him, the way she seemed to belong to a world entirely her own. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But the rare woman who lingers in a man's soul understands that transformation is not forced. It is evoked in silence, in the subtle architecture of presence and absence. She does not storm the gates of his mind with declarations or constant reminders of her worth. She plants herself instead like a symbol, the kind that appears in dreams, inexplicable yet deeply felt. Her power is not loud. It hums beneath the surface of her gestures, in the economy of her words, in the way her gaze can rest on him without grasping for possession. And here lies the paradox. It is precisely her refusal to cling that makes her unforgettable. Men are rarely conscious of it, but they are drawn to what Jung called the anima, the feminine image within their own psyche. Some women mirror it too plainly, trying to become what they think a man's inner world craves. But the unforgettable woman becomes a mirror he can never fully decipher. She allows his projections, yet never collapses into them. She stands apart, both muse and mystery, compelling him to return to her image because it eludes final understanding. In those quiet moves, the ones that seem almost accidental, she awakens the deeper instincts of pursuit. A slight withdrawal at the moment of highest closeness. A glance that lingers just a breath too short. A silence where an answer might have been expected. These are not manipulations, for they do not spring from fear or strategy. They are the natural expressions of a woman rooted in her own inner kingdom. Her center is not in him, and that is what unsettles him. Most men, on some level, expect to be the axis upon which a woman's emotions turn. When they encounter one whose emotional climate does not shift to match theirs, it forces them into confrontation, not with her, but with themselves. He feels a subtle disorientation, a disruption in the usual pattern. And though his ego resists, a part of him is magnetized. This is the paradox of masculine desire. It hungers for what it cannot fully own. When she listens as though she could hear the layers beneath his words, and sometimes she lets the truth hang between them without speaking it aloud. She gives him space to reveal himself, but she never lays herself bare in equal measure. This asymmetry becomes a haunting tension. He feels he has touched only the surface of her depths, and the imagination, that restless architect of longing, does the rest. Jung wrote that the meeting with oneself is the meeting with the shadow. In her presence, he begins to sense the outline of his own shadow, the parts of him unclaimed or repressed, surfacing in the fascination he cannot name. But there is another reason she remains etched into his memory. She leaves without making a scene. No storm, no collapse, no desperate plea. When she steps away, it feels like the closing of a rare book before the final chapter has been read. He is left holding the weight of incompletion. The male ego, so often cushioned by the belief that a woman will always orbit back, finds itself stripped of that comfort. And in that void, she becomes not just a memory, but an unresolved archetype. This kind of feminine presence does not rise from accident or pretense. It comes from a life lived with the awareness that love is not survival, and that validation is not currency. She is complete before the first meeting and whole after the last parting. And so, her interactions are unhurried, her affection unforced. She is the woman who can look at a man with tenderness, yet walk away without shattering. Because her roots are planted in the soil of her own becoming. There is a stillness in her absence that men cannot fill with substitutes. They may try, new faces, new voices, fleeting pleasures, but the ghost of her quiet power lingers. Not in the details of her body, nor even in the exact memory of her voice, but in the space she occupied within them. The space that reflected something they could not yet grasp in themselves. And this is why he does not forget her. Not because she demanded remembrance, but because she became a fragment of his own journey toward the self. The truth is that the most unforgettable women are not those who try to be unforgettable. They are the ones who live as though they are already whole, who treat connection as an enrichment, not an anchor. In their presence, a man is reminded, consciously or not, of the distance between who he is and who he could be. And that reminder, once felt, is not easily erased. She moves through the world as if carrying an invisible boundary, not a wall, but a sacred perimeter. It is this invisible line that both invites and denies. A man may step toward her warmth, but he senses instinctively that her essence will never be fully his to claim. This tension feeds the deeper layers of attraction, the ones not born of momentary pleasure, but of existential hunger. Jung might say she embodies the archetype of the self for him, a glimpse of wholeness he has not yet achieved. And because she does not try to bridge the distance for him, that image becomes a haunting compass. Her quiet moves are not grand gestures. They are almost imperceptible shifts, ripples that move across his psyche without fanfare. A soft disengagement from the conversation just before it ends. A moment where her eyes turn away, as if listening to something within herself that is more compelling than the moment shared. These are not performances. They are the natural expressions of a woman whose inner life is richer than any external validation could provide. The man, whether he knows it or not, is drawn not only to her beauty, but to the strange magnetic autonomy that breathes through her. In a world where desperation is disguised as devotion, she is different. She is not withholding out of fear. She is selective out of truth. This difference is critical. For a man, it changes the entire texture of the connection. When attention and affection are not given by default, but offered sparingly and authentically, they gain weight. Every smile feels earned. Every moment becomes charged. He begins to crave the smallest gestures, the way she says his name, the brief brush of her hand, because they are not scattered like coins into the street. They are given like rare offerings. This rarity is what allows her absence to echo. When she steps back, the silence is not merely the lack of sound. It is the sudden withdrawal of something sacred. The male ego, so accustomed to constant affirmation, is thrown into unfamiliar terrain. He wonders where her thoughts go when they are not on him. He wonders if she feels the same pull he does. This uncertainty is not comfortable, but it is alive. It forces him into a state of vigilance, a constant awareness of her. From a Jungian lens, such a woman stirs the man's unconscious projections. But unlike the compliant mirror who reflects only what he wishes to see, she refracts them. He sees fragments of himself in her, but they come back altered, demanding interpretation. This keeps her from becoming static in his mind. Instead, she is a living riddle, changing shape each time he tries to define her. And the psyche loves what it cannot resolve. There is also a certain grace in her restraint. She does not correct his misunderstandings of her, nor does she rush to prove her worth. This patience, this refusal to beg for recognition, builds an aura around her. It suggests an inner knowing that no amount of external validation could add to or take away from. Men can sense this even without understanding it consciously. The quiet confidence of a woman who would rather be alone than diminish herself. Her silence is not a void, but a presence in itself. It has texture, temperature, and weight. When she chooses not to speak, it is not because she has nothing to say, but because the moment does not require her voice. This unhurried relationship with expression contrasts sharply with the frantic energy of those who fear being forgotten. And paradoxically, it is exactly this lack of fear that ensures she will not be forgotten. It is worth noting that these quiet moves work only when they emerge from authenticity. If they are imitated without the inner work behind them, they collapse into manipulation, and manipulation eventually reveals itself. The unforgettable woman's power lies in the fact that she is not trying to be unforgettable. She is tending to her own life, her own passions, her own shadows. Her autonomy is not a performance, it is a truth, and truth has a way of engraving itself on the psyche. Men remember her not only because of who she was to them, but because of who they were in her presence. Around her, they felt both drawn out of themselves and yet returned to themselves in some unexplainable way. She did not just touch them, she altered the architecture of their inner world, even if only slightly. And once a man has felt that shift, it becomes part of him. It is this blend of intimacy and untouchability that lingers. Like a song half remembered, or a dream whose images dissolve upon waking yet leave the heart pounding, her essence stays. He may try to silence it with distraction, but certain quiet moments, a familiar scent, a dim light, the echo of a laugh in another room, will call her back to him without warning. And in those moments, she is as vivid as if she had never left. There is a certain discipline in how she moves through connection, a discipline born not of coldness, but of self-respect. She knows that intensity without boundaries quickly becomes chaos, and so she lets desire breathe within the container of her own sovereignty. This is what makes her presence feel both intoxicating and safe, dangerous yet grounding. A man cannot easily categorize her, for she is neither the fragile dependent nor the impenetrable fortress. She is something rarer, a woman who can open and close her heart with the same steadiness, guided not by fear, but by choice. He senses this in the pauses between her words, in the way she listens without rushing to fill the air. She is unafraid of silence, and silence in her company is never awkward. It is a space alive with the weight of unspoken thoughts, of meaning that drifts just beyond articulation. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances, but he might have added that the reaction depends as much on what is withheld as on what is given. She understands this instinctively, allowing what is unsaid to ferment in his mind until it becomes more potent than anything declared outright. Her quiet moves are, in truth, the outward ripples of a deeper inner reality. She has done her shadow work. She has faced the parts of herself that once would have begged for approval, performed for attention, or clung to love as a lifeline. Now, she no longer needs to consume another person to feel whole. This wholeness radiates through every interaction, and men, often without knowing why, are drawn to it like travelers toward a lighthouse. They may not even want to dock in her harbor. Sometimes it is enough just to know such a place exists. And yet, she is not invulnerable. Her mystery does not come from a lack of feeling, but from the depth of it. She has learned to hold her emotions without spilling them carelessly into the hands of someone unready to receive them. This restraint is not repression, it is stewardship. She guards her inner world the way a skilled gardener protects a rare bloom, knowing that not all who admire its beauty are capable of nurturing it. The man who encounters such careful strength is left with a paradox in his heart. He yearns to enter her inner sanctum, yet respects and even fears the fact that it cannot be forced. He may attempt to provoke her, to draw out a reaction, to test the edges of her composure. But she will not offer the easy drama that others have given him. When anger comes, it arrives like winter, cold, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. When affection flows, it is given with the warmth of spring, but never on demand. Her rhythms are her own, tied not to his moods or his validation, but to the seasons of her own soul. In this way, she teaches him something about himself. She becomes, often without trying, a mirror in which his own dependence, need for control, or hunger for constant reassurance becomes visible. This can be uncomfortable, even confronting. Some men will retreat from it, unable to face the reflection. But others will find themselves unable to walk away, drawn back again and again by the sense that she holds some key, not to her, but to their own unclaimed wholeness. The unforgettable nature of her presence lies in its refusal to dissolve into his narrative. She has her own story, her own mythology, and he is only a chapter, never the entire book. This realization does not diminish her in his eyes. It magnifies her. Men are conditioned to believe that to be loved is to be the center of someone's world. When they meet a woman whose love is real but whose world remains her own, it destabilizes the ego in a way that is both disarming and addictive. She is not trying to make herself scarce. She is simply not available to be consumed. She belongs first to herself, to her work, her passions, her solitude, her dreams. When she shares these with him, it is not as a gift surrendered, but as a realm opened briefly for him to wander. And like a traveler in a foreign land, he knows he will never understand it all. The foreignness itself becomes the fascination. Over time, he realizes that it is not her beauty, nor even her kindness, that has etched her into his mind. It is the way she lives untouched by the need to be remembered. In this, she violates an unspoken rule, the one that says a woman must secure her place in a man's heart through endless effort. By breaking it, she does not vanish from his memory. She becomes the memory he cannot erase. And perhaps the cruelest truth, or the most beautiful, is that she never set out to make him remember. She simply lived as she was, whole and unafraid, and in doing so became unforgettable. There is a certain inevitability to the way she imprints herself on him, as if she is not merely a person he met, but an encounter he was destined to have. In Jungian terms, such moments are charged with numinosity. They pierce the ordinary fabric of life and feel like they carry a meaning beyond the visible. She does not force this significance. It arises from the contrast between her stillness and the chaos of a world that constantly clamors for attention. He begins to notice that her presence has altered his perception. Colors feel sharper when she is near, and the air carries a certain weight. Even her absence feels physical, a hollow that nothing else seems to fill. This is the paradox of deep feminine energy. It is not always about what she does, but about the invisible field she generates around her. And once a man has stood in that field, he cannot pretend it never existed. She does not weaponize this effect. In fact, she often seems unaware of the full extent of her influence. But her life is built on principles that naturally produce it: boundaries without bitterness, warmth without possession, detachment without indifference. Each of these traits signals something rare: a woman who is guided not by the fluctuations of a man's attention, but by the steady rhythm of her own purpose. And yet, when she gives, it is never casual. A simple touch of her hand can feel like a benediction. A glance across a crowded room can pierce through the noise and anchor him in place. These moments are powerful precisely because they are not constant. Scarcity magnifies value, and she understands this without calculation. Her restraint makes her generosity glow all the brighter. For a man, such encounters stir ancient instincts. They awaken the hunter in him, not in the crude sense of conquest, but in the deeper sense of pursuit. The search for something precious that resists easy capture. And here lies the psychological hook. What cannot be possessed often becomes the most enduring obsession. This is not manipulation. It is the inevitable result of her self-possession. She belongs to herself first, and to no one else completely. There is also the matter of how she holds her own mystery. Mystery, in the truest sense, is not a riddle to be solved, but a depth to be experienced. She is willing to be known, but not entirely mapped. She will share stories, but not all of them. She will let him see her vulnerable, but not in ways that strip her of dignity. This creates an inner architecture of trust, not blind, not total, but deliberate. And in a world where oversharing has become the currency of connection, her selective revelation feels like an act of elegance. The unforgettable woman is not without shadow. She knows her flaws intimately, has traced the edges of her wounds, and made peace with the parts of herself that once terrified her. This self-reconciliation frees her from seeking constant repair from others. Men sense this equilibrium. They may not articulate it, but they feel the absence of need in her gaze. That absence is not coldness. It is the warmth of someone who loves from abundance rather than from lack. In his private moments, he may wrestle with questions she never answers. Why does she not reach out when he pulls away? Why does she seem equally luminous in solitude as in his company? Why does her attention feel like a privilege rather than a guarantee? These questions loop in his mind, each one drawing him back to her image. The more he tries to resolve them, the more entangled he becomes. And should she leave, without fanfare, without bitterness, it will be the unfinished nature of their story that brands itself into his memory. The male psyche, with its hunger for completion, is unsettled by what remains open-ended. He will imagine the paths they might have walked together, the words left unsaid, the moments that could have been. In this way, she lives on in his mind, not as a static photograph, but as an ongoing narrative. Jung might say that such a woman becomes a symbol within him, a container for his own projections, longings, and unclaimed aspects of self. She is not the symbol because she tries to be. She becomes it because she refuses to shrink to fit a man's understanding. Her wholeness forces him to confront his incompleteness. And while this confrontation may unsettle him, it also binds him to the memory of her. In the end, it is not her beauty, her kindness, or even her love that makes her unforgettable. It is the rare combination of presence and self-governance, of intimacy and independence. She allows herself to be touched but never owned. She can walk alongside a man, but her path is never swallowed by his. And when she finally steps away, she leaves not emptiness, but an echo, one that calls to him in quiet hours, reminding him of what it feels like to be in the orbit of a woman who truly belongs to herself. There comes a moment, often years later, when he realizes that no one else has carried the same gravity. He may have loved again, perhaps even deeply, but the texture was different. With her, there was always the sense of standing at the edge of something vast, a mystery he could touch but never claim. That memory becomes less about her as an individual and more about the state she awakened in him. It is the longing for that aliveness, that rare combination of intimacy and distance, that refuses to fade. She never positioned herself as the prize to be won. She simply embodied the truth that she was already complete. In doing so, she reversed the usual power dynamic without force or declaration. Men accustomed to being pursued found themselves wondering how to hold her attention. Those who assumed love meant ownership discovered that love could also mean freedom. And it is this redefinition that etches itself deepest into the male psyche. The realization that a woman could be fully his in a moment, yet fully hers forever. Her quiet moves often defied his expectations. She did not flood his days with constant messages, yet when she spoke, her words stayed with him for weeks. She did not seek to impress him, yet he found himself scanning her every gesture for meaning. When she withdrew, it was not punishment. It was simply the natural ebb of her energy toward her own life. This rhythm, foreign to his patterns, forced him to adapt, to meet her on her terms, or risk losing her entirely. From a Jungian perspective, she stirred his process of individuation. She embodied qualities that he admired, but had not yet integrated within himself: patience, self-trust, emotional sovereignty. Her presence became both an invitation and a challenge. On some unconscious level, he understood that to match her, he would have to grow. And while some men shrink from this, others find themselves pursuing not just her, but the version of themselves they might become in her orbit. She understood the human ego, its need to be fed, its tendency to cling, its fear of losing control. But she did not indulge these in ways that weakened either of them. Instead, she gave him the gift of contrast. Where others soothed his insecurities with overexposure, she allowed space for them to surface, unmasked. Where others might have bent to keep him close, she held her shape, even if it meant his absence. This subtle refusal to be molded was not rebellion. It was the natural consequence of a woman who had learned the cost of self-betrayal and vowed never to pay it again. Even her presence in a room carried an unspoken hierarchy. It wasn't dominance in the loud performative sense, but a gravitational pull, the way some storms can be felt before they are seen. Men noticed her without knowing why. Some were unsettled, others captivated, but all were aware. She did not seek this awareness. It followed her, the byproduct of inner alignment. Over time, he may have come to test her resolve. He might have tried to provoke jealousy, to lure her into chasing, to confirm that she needed him. But each attempt dissolved against the quiet stone of her being. She could feel desire without turning it into dependence. She could offer affection without bargaining it for commitment. This was not detachment born of cynicism, but of clarity. The clarity that love is a choice, not a cage. When she did choose to let him in, it was with deliberate presence. She did not multitask her attention, did not scatter her energy between him and the world beyond. For those moments, he felt entirely seen. And that depth of focus is a rare currency in a distracted age. It is why, even in her absence, he could recall the precise timbre of her voice, the way her eyes seemed to look not at him, but through him, into the place where he kept his truest self hidden. The end of their connection, if it came, did not arrive with theatrics. It was more like the quiet closing of a door in a house filled with memories. She did not beg him to stay, nor curse him for leaving. She simply returned to her life, intact. And that intactness, the fact that she did not shatter, became the final imprint. For the male ego, it was both humbling and unforgettable. She had loved him, but she did not need him to remain whole. And so she became, in his private mythology, less a person than a threshold. Crossing into her world had changed him, and though he might never return, a part of him would always stand in that doorway, wondering what might have been, wondering if such a woman would ever appear again. Years later, in the quiet moments between obligations, he still feels it, that faint, almost imperceptible ache. It is not for her body, not even for her voice, but for the atmosphere that surrounded her. Being near her felt like stepping into a temple whose air was heavier, more sacred than the rest of the world. You don't forget such places. You carry them inside you, and every now and then, without warning, a scent or a certain light in the afternoon sky will return you there. She was not a fantasy. Fantasies are fragile. They dissolve when touched by reality. She was real, and that reality was sharper, more unyielding than anything he had imagined. She could wound with silence, yet heal with a single word. She could be close enough to feel his breath, yet remain untouched by the gravitational pull that had undone others. He never learned how she did it, because the truth was that she wasn't doing it. She was simply living as a woman who had reclaimed herself from the claws of dependency, who had chosen wholeness over possession, self-respect over the comfort of being kept. Jung would say she had individuated. She had brought the contents of her shadow into light, accepted both her softness and her steel, and therefore did not need to contort herself to earn love. This is what made her dangerous to his ego. He could not control her, could not bend her into a shape that confirmed his dominance. In her presence, he had to meet her as an equal, and in moments when he could not, the imbalance burned him with quiet shame. That burn, too, was unforgettable. When she loved, she did not merge into him like water into water. She loved like the sun loves the earth, fully, fiercely, yet from a distance that preserves both identities. This was love without consumption, without erasure. It was a love that gave, but never surrendered the right to step back into solitude. And he understood, perhaps too late, that this was the rarest love of all, the kind that does not ask for chains. The way she ended things, if they ended, was a lesson in itself. There was no grand speech, no unraveling of past grievances. She simply let the tide pull her away, trusting that what was meant to remain would remain. She carried herself as though departure was not an ending, but a continuation of her path, one that did not require witnesses to be valid. For him, this absence was unbearable precisely because it was so calm. Rage can be argued with, tears can be soothed, but serenity is final. It offers no handle to grab. And so she lingered, not in his phone in his bed, but in his thoughts, his dreams, the unguarded moments when the mind drifts toward what it cannot resolve. She became an internal voice that whispered when he was tempted to settle, when he was on the edge of betraying himself, when he remembered what it felt like to stand before someone who answered only to her own soul. It is easy to forget those who gave themselves away cheaply. It is impossible to forget the one who remained expensive, not in material terms, but in spirit. The one whose approval was never bought, whose love was never bartered, whose attention was a gift of the present moment and never a debt to be repaid. She was expensive because she had paid the highest cost herself, the long, lonely work of becoming her own anchor. He will meet other women, perhaps many. Some will be kinder, some will be more accommodating, some will be louder in their declarations of love. But none will carry the same weight. Weight is not loud, it is silent. It lives in the pauses, in the restraint, in the knowledge that a woman can hold herself steady in any storm. That was her weight. That was her quiet power. In the end, her legacy in his life is not a series of memories, but a shift in his compass. She taught him, wordlessly, that love is not ownership, that attraction is not always meant to be resolved, and that the rarest human beings are those who could stay, but don't have to. And it is this freedom, more than any beauty or sweetness, that leaves a man unable to erase her. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.